Okay, today is the Liquid Dialogue, and we have been going through 7 Liquid Dialogue already, and this time is the 8th one. And this is we are very happy today because we have 2 very remarkable people that come here to share their experience and their interpretation of heritage and also cultural and intangible cultural heritage with us. And I don't want to waste your time, and I will introduce them to the stage. First is Dr. Ho-yin. Yeah.
I'll sit here. I don't be in the hot seat alone.
Anyone who don't know Dr. Lee Ho-yin?
Ho-yin, just Ho-yin.
Ho-yin, okay. Now everyone know him, is it? So I don't need to introduce too much.
No, people don't want to know me, but
no,
they want to know him. He's the man.
You're both important. Ho-yin has been teaching in Hong Kong for 15 years, and he got award as well. Do you have the gold medal? Very big one.
No, it's a long service award. We call it the Old People's Award. I was hoping for a gold Rolex, but they gave me a ballpoint pen, so I was very disappointed.
And also, he is very engaged in a department called Agricultural and Conservation Programs Department. And he's the head of that, and he's very busy during this time because he has to do a lot of opening and preparation for the course, but he still is here today. We have big claps for him. And also, another very remarkable guest is Michael Wolf. He's here. He's lived in Hong Kong for over 22 years. In fact, he's local. He's a Hong Konger with same as us. And then he has did a lot and tried to recap the memories and moments in Hong Kong for Hong Kong people. And his art pieces, not just in Hong Kong, he brings his art pieces all over the world at international level. And he's just come back from France and also Berlin after the tour of exhibition and the book signing thing. So a big clap for him because he came back yesterday and he is here to share his experience with us.
Anybody with a name Wu in Scotland is remarkable. Sing long. Wow.
You know, in the past when we call people who are obscene, we call color wolf, but I know Michael Wolf is very, very, very famous. Yeah. Okay, then now I will leave the microphones to Michael, and in the first he will present or to tell us the stories between him and Ho-yin with the presentation, and afterwards they will discuss about heritage and the memories in Hong Kong. Thank you, Michael.
I'm Michael, and I've lived in Hong Kong since 1994. I came here as a photojournalist, and from 1994 until 2003, I spent 6 months a year in mainland China working on stories. And in 2003, I decided to quit, and SARS came to town. And I remember in April, my wife was so frightened because a friend of ours had died that she said, I'm going to leave Hong Kong with our son, and I don't know if I'm coming back. And I suddenly realized that I've lived in Hong Kong for 7 years. I've never photographed the city. I was always in mainland China. When I came back to Hong Kong, I was more or less relaxing, but I never explored the town. And then when SARS came, I decided to quit my job at the magazine and explore the city. So this is the first topic that I worked on, called Architecture of Density. It's become it's a unique form of architecture. This density you don't have anywhere else. And the interesting thing about the photographs, this is the Victoria Home Estate. The interesting thing about the photographs is that you have no sky and no horizon. And that creates an illusion because you have no idea how big the building is. It could be 10 times as big, it could be 20 times as big. And it doesn't let your eye escape. These are the famous Hong Kong industrial buildings. There's still a few around. But all the cottage industry in the 60s, every little room had its own small factory making buttons or making metal. This is in Corey Bay, quite a beautiful corridor, but now it's changed, it's been totally renovated, but you're not allowed to build that way because there's not enough light coming in. But still, I find it quite beautiful. This is in check his name. And notice all the things hanging out of the windows. You have mops, you have pans, you have all kinds of things. And the reason is that people don't have enough space. It's a unique way of Hong Kong repairing things with scaffolding and covering it with this beautiful netting. This is the view of Central. You see the density. This is off Hollywood Road. Well, it's a bit different because it's not, I like those flat, two-dimensional ones, but it's also interesting. You have all the different styles of architecture there.
Going to comment a little bit on the first series of programs.
Yeah.
This is the series that made Michael famous as a European.
Yes.
Well, this is the field of architecture. When the time when this 2006 when it came up, this series program to publish 2006. At the time I was still teaching architectural design at the University of Hong Kong. And every other student would come to me and show me Michael's program and ask me, do you know this guy, who took his program? And of course, I didn't know Michael then to say no. And then they give me that this price slope is that part, you don't know Michael, So got to a point that I think, one of these days, if I meet this Michael guy, I'm going to strangle him.
Thank God he didn't. So what's interesting, I exhibited these all over the world, and every time I exhibited them, people came up and said, how do people live in there? They wanted to know what does it look like, and I decided I wanted to do a series of interiors. And I went around and I found that it's very, very difficult to get into any building. There are always guards. They always, whenever you go in, they say, where are you going? And I say, I don't know, just want to look around. They say, no, go out. And in April of 2006, actually it was in February, a friend of mine called me and said, have you ever heard of the Shepke Bay estate? It's Hong Kong's oldest housing estate. It's been torn down now. He said it's going to be torn down and all the residents have to leave by May 1st, 2006. So I went there in April, 4 days in April. And I was very lucky because the social worker there decided to help me, and she brought me really to every single room and introduced me, and then really facilitated the work. The reason it's called 100 by 100 is because every room is 100 square feet, a little bit more, 102. And the book, if you see the book over there, there are 100 pictures. And all I did was I went over the door, I asked them to sit there, and I took a few pictures, and I think in 4 days I took 127 rooms. But in the beginning I had no clue that they were all the same. Until the social worker said, yes, every room is the same. And for me, it was a very interesting project because it's about sociology as well. You can see what every room has in common. It has a fan, and you can also have usually a TV, a clock, and you can also see the colors. I mean, this is a fascinating picture. Look at the way the storage is done in the plastic bag. You see so much detail and so much wealth of information in this. Here again, all the plastic bags up on top. They're very, very small. This is even a subdivided one. So it's only 50 square feet. You can see the days I photographed it. It's usually 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th. Because there's usually a calendar in the room. But this is real Hong Kong culture. And unfortunately, all the residents were forced to move into one of these high-rises. And I had a questionnaire. I asked them 4 questions. How long have you been here? What work do you do? And what do you like living here? And 90% of them, and why do you like living here? 90% of the people said because of the community. These rooms always have a terrace out in front, and the doors are always open. And if someone is sick, the neighbors will come and see it, and they'll go shopping for you, and things like that. And in these new buildings, you don't do that. It's not possible. So this is another project Ho-yin and I worked on. I have to explain the way I approach topics. I'm not an academic and I'm not a conceptualist. I basically just follow my gut. And I walk around and I see things which interest me and I start collecting them. And at some point I realize I have enough to make a book or a project. And corner houses was something. I think this was the first picture I saw, the first corner house I saw. And isn't this a magnificent specimen? You see that little wooden balcony, it has beautiful windows, a rooftop. Fascinating for me. And I saw this and I photographed it and I didn't really think about the topic of corner houses, but then I realized that there are very many. And I started collecting them. Christ loved home for the aged. It's at the old Kai Tak airport. I'm not sure if it's even there anymore. This is in Vietnam. So, all the books that Ho-yin and I have made together are over on the table after the talk. You can go and have a look at them. But Ho-yin came up with a wonderful idea that he tracks down the architect. And on the book you have on the right-hand side the photograph, and on the left-hand side you have the date that it was built, you have the architect, and what else?
The floor area maybe for height, something like that. And this is a project that brought us together in our collaboration. And
but why did I approach you?
Good question.
Probably someone said go to Ho-yin. He's the professor at Hong Kong U, and he's for architecture, combination, and preservation.
Unfortunately, when he came to me, he asked me about what do you know about these corner houses, the answers, nothing. Really don't know anything about it. He used to want to make me go find out about this building. So I said, okay, let's go find out. So it's a lot of work, and to luckily get help, and Stephen was so busy come. And we went to the building department and we tried to look up to check all the drawings of the buildings we photographed. And it was especially difficult because Michael, being an artist, right, you never record the details, the dress, the kind of inner information that the architect must have. So we have to figure it out, like where exactly this building is located in order to track the text.
It's not that I'm an artist, it's that I'm lazy. And sometimes it's quite difficult, and I just like to work fast, because I like to do 2 or 3 houses a day. So I think in the book we have 50 corner houses.
And how many have been already found out? Maybe 10 or?
You know that, huh?
Yeah.
Probably more.
Probably more.
Probably more. But this is part of Hong Kong's heritage. It's a unique form of architecture. And that's one of the topics here. Why does the government tear these beautiful houses down? Because on that same area, on that same property, you can build a 50-floor high-rise to make 1,000 times more money than for the rent here. And that's actually a real crime. This is a topic Ho-yin and I also did. It's something which I also instinctively started collecting.
This project you drag me kicking and screaming to.
I dragged you kicking and screaming to several projects.
I really didn't want to be involved in this project.
Yes, but you see, it's really symptomatic here. Most people would say it's, they're worthless, but they're so beautiful, and you see them everywhere, and they have the placement. Look at that, it's an old milk bottle. Yeah,
exactly. My reaction is like, yeah, like so on.
Yes, but imagine a professor for conservation and preservation says that. Now imagine what someone says who has nothing to do with the topic. They would just say, get rid of them.
So I don't know, should be ashamed.
Yes, we should be ashamed of yourself. It is so beautiful, it's like a face. And many of them are in the bizarrest places. Look at that, somewhere in the corner, down behind boards, so you don't even see it.
This is a series of photographs showing a very much abused garden. Abused garden.
A Small God, Big City is a brilliant title, and Ho-yin came up with it.
No, they did it together. You want something that is catchy at the same time that speak well of the photograph, right?
But you said the sentence first.
Well, the thing is that even short, I think I prefer the abused garden.
And that's sort of symptomatic for my style of photography, that I don't really put the God in the center. I show the surroundings, and this is so typical for Hong Kong, this piping and the board up, but there you have the God.
This is, in fact, what I call is compatible with the understanding of heritage. And in architecture, we train as an architect. And we tend to focus on the building, right, as an object, and we don't care about the context, and that's not good. So in conservation, we look at the context to inform us about why this heritage item is significant. So this is exactly what Michael Wood's program about. So showing the context in order to understand the object.
Sure.
Coca-Cola. It's great, it's not just the power of the father, it's just so welcome to this Chinese store sponsored by Coca-Cola.
It's like a piece of art. just a red piece of paper. It's enough to be a god. Again, you often find them jammed in the corners.
Next to a party.
But you have pipes everywhere now. I can do a book about pipes. You want to write something?
I go to know.
But every time you said no, I convinced you to do it, and then after you've done it, you were quite happy.
Oh, happy so maybe.
This beautiful shelter, and the little glass with the wilted
This is so sad.
No, but it's so typical for Hong Kong. You don't find this anywhere else in the world. These earth glass. And people here sometimes they don't care. They don't care. In Thailand, the gods are all extremely beautiful. But here, as long as there's a god there where you put incense, it's fine.
For some reason, having gone through the photographs, and I sense that God in Hong Kong was treated more like a pet. You get respect, you don't want them just throw them away. Yeah, living under a tree, that is the balance over here.
Again, right. So, this is the project I've been working on for 13 years almost. And it's another one I had to drag Ho-yin to kicking and screaming, literally. And he always avoided talking to me about it, and he just refused to do it. He said, why should I think something about Hong Kong's back alleys?
It's about back alley, breakdown, I said, why not my reaction?
And fortunately, his colleague, Linda Stefano, convinced him. I remember I phoned her, I think, December 24th in Switzerland. And what I proposed is, because she works for the World Heritage Foundation also and evaluates World Heritage sites, if they're worth it or not. And I said, Lynn, why don't you write a proposal that these back alleys should become a World Heritage site. And then she said, well, just don't worry, I know Ho-yin very, very well, and I'll convince him to do the book. And in the end, he did, and I think you're happy that he did.
Maybe. Well, actually, the two of them, Michael and Lynn, they dragged me out of the office and frog marched me to a back alley of the toilet.
Yeah, that's another thing. Because he'd never been in the back alley, he refused to go into a back alley.
So the two of them were dragging me to the back alley and then explained to me everything about the back alley and how wonderful it is and so on and so on and so on. And he tell you, so finally, I said, I agree, okay, we agreed to do the book together. And so one of my students, a very bright woman from mainland China, she's doing a PhD now at the Polytechnic University. And Vicky, if you're here, and so she thought this was an interesting project. So and she wanted to do background research. So I said, okay. So we sent her off to the alley that you dragged me into. And
that's what professors do, they just delegate.
That's right. My medium, that's what I said, my medium. And so she came back with very detailed information. Detailed, a lot of them, with 9 drawings and all, of drain covers. A lot of drain covers, manhole covers, drain covers. And I was like, oh no, I said, Michael will train me, so this is, I'm going to be doing a book on drain covers.
There is a book on drain covers.
Oh no,
MIT Press.
It's alright.
Yeah.
So now I know a lot about drain cover, about the design, what it means, the cover what. So you want to know about drain cover, come to me.
But for me, this is the most fascinating project I've worked on, and I still go into a back alley almost every day because they're constantly changing, and there's so many examples of how the Hong Kongers survive. So this is storage, for instance. Every pipe is used to jam something behind, and nothing is ever stolen. But look at this weird accumulation of objects. It's probably for one of the cleaning days. There's a beer can because you can sell it. There's some plastic water bottles, rubber boots and shoes. I did a book. You can look at it over there. That pink cover and umbrellas. I also did a book called Hong Kong Umbrella. In the back, if I'm walking through Hong Kong and it's ever raining, I just go into a back alley and grab an umbrella because every back alley has at least 20 or 30. Nothing is thrown away here, nothing. Because you might be able to use it. Look at the string there.
Well, I didn't tell you this story while writing the text for the book. So I had to check on something. So I went back to one of the back alleys that you introduced me to. Yeah. And without you telling me. And then I bumped into a guy who's resting in the back alley. And he told me, say, why are you here? He asked me, why are you here? I said, oh, I'm just doing some research because this back alley is supposed to have a lot of interesting things. I said, yeah, that's what Wilo, that's the word he used. Wilo told me, they always come around and check out the back alley. And at that point, I was very tempted to tell him, I said, shut the door in, he's a scary guy.
But in Hong Kong, for instance, you talk to anyone, and no one wants to go into these back alleys. They tell you the triads are there, you're going to get robbed. I have never, ever been assaulted, robbed, or anything. Actually, it's the opposite. I once stuck my camera bag, and a half hour later, I remembered, shit, I have to go back. I backtracked and went to the back alley, and one of the cleaning ladies already waved and said, here's your bag. And that would never happen in any other country. They would just take it. But, you know, it's a Confucius society. The people are actually quite honest. Storage again.
This is one of those photographs that made me wary about participating in this project. I said, pipes.
Yes, but look how creatively they're used.
Yeah, that's exactly what he told me. I really wasn't convinced.
But you are now. This is also very typical. These two pictures.
See, I told you, this is my reaction when you try to sell me the idea of this series of photographs.
Every picture reveals something about the population of a city. I mean, this reveals, for instance, this is a Confucius society. Because in any other country, you would just throw it on the ground. But here, you just stick it in there because that's not throwing it onto the ground. The same with that. Damn it, if your conscience is clear. One of my all-time favorite topics is the backs of carts. And the cart is really one of the main transport modes in Hong Kong. You see them everywhere. And you buy the cart without any backing. And the thing is, imagine you have it full of cardboard and newspaper and you push it uphill. It would fall through the back. So every cart has a weave. And every cart has a different weave. And the weave reveals something about the owner. Because some are very anal, some are very free-form. I mean, this is beautiful.
This sounds like you, anal is me. The free-form guy.
So I have a whole. If you look at our book, Informal Solutions, I have a whole chapter just on the backs of cards. I mean, I would like to just buy one and cut it off and hang it on the wall. They're so beautiful.
Oh, that reminds me. Remember one time we were wandering in the Wan Chai market. And we went into a small shop aquarium to sell tropical fish, right? And you are looking into Hong Kong bastard chairs, right? The homemade chairs. And saw this tiny little stool that's cobbled together with nails and bits of pieces of wood. And this insane guy, he spoke for the owner, and he said, and he offered $500 to buy that little stool. I said, what? Insane, give me $500, I make you one.
No, but that's an interesting story. I really wanted that bastard chair because it was one of the most beautiful ones I'd ever seen. And I went back 5 months later, 6 months later. There was an old lady who was always sitting on it. Very low chair.
She refused to sell it to you.
And she refused to sell it. And then I thought maybe if I send an older woman by, a Cantonese woman, she can convince her. And I said, offer her $3,000. She refused. And then 2 years later, I sent someone by and I said, offer her $5,000. She refused to sell. And then I was there, I think, last year or the year before, and the chair was gone. And her daughter was there, and I said, where's that chair? And she said, oh, laptop, I threw it away.
And who am I to,
Oh my God.
See someone die and you're crying for several days.
No, but I'm very tenacious. If I see something which is good, I really go after it. But I have a very large collection of chairs, real chairs, and I exhibit them in Europe, not in Hong Kong. But I don't take these chairs. I always offer them $500. And one person sold me a chair, and I said, "Here are the $500," and he just shook his head and he said, "Give me 20." So that was very generous. There's a whole chapter in the book just on gloves. You need gloves to work here, and every evening the workers wash out their gloves, and you see them in very strange conditions. I often visit places again, and this is just a few days later how things change. String, Hong Kong string, you never throw a piece of string away. You just put it behind the pipe because you never know if you need it again. They're very thrifty here. These people, they earn maybe $6,000 or $7,000, and so they really try to save money. So it's a form of resourcefulness and thriftiness. Plus, they're very beautiful. Moss. You have another chapter in the book, moss, and I've also done a book on it. There's so many mops in the back alleys because they need cleaning, and then in the evening they're put out to dry. And it's so interesting the way they sometimes put them out to dry. You can see the date. I visited it, because I always go back to places just to see how they've changed. And every time it was different. And the great thing is, this is around the corner from the Hong Kong Jockey Club, where the bettors are. And this has the purpose to keep people going in there and pissing. So it's a wonderful idea. But I mean, it's like art. Chairs, Hong Kong seating arrangements. There's also a little book over there. It's so amazing what you find here, how creative people get to keep their asses clean. It's like a Hong Kong news chair. The two chairs on the right, they were there for maybe 10 years. And And I walk, because my flat is around the corner, and I always walk by, and at some point, fortunately, I decided to photograph them because they're gone now. Three-legged chairs. I always collect them, and look how resourceful it is. You don't need to throw a three-legged chair away. You just lean it against the wall, and that's basically the fourth leg. This is a whole collection of chairs I photographed in Hong Kong. I mean, I buy these things because they're just such beautiful examples of that you don't care how something looks. The main thing is that it works.
Somebody in the audience is going to come up to you afterwards. Michael, come along. Or chairs to sell me.
Well, they have to be good chairs. I don't buy anything. The white monoblocks I don't like. The plastic ones. The alcoves. I've done a whole series of people taking breaks. The great thing is that all the back alleys, they have 2 or 3 alcoves. And if you get into it, you own it. And it's like your own private space. Every time when you go home, you're surrounded by people and you're working hard. But if you have this little space, for 10 or 15 minutes, you smoke a cigarette or you text, it's your private space. That's it. Yeah. No, not frozen. Just being.
The last photograph, only the last photograph show people. No, you had that earlier. Most of your photographs don't show people. Shows the intention of people.
It's true, but this shows really something about the use of space. So sometimes 100 by 100 shows.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So in certain instances. But you see, all these things I don't think of beforehand. I walk through the back alleys and I start photographing. In the evenings I download them and I put things in the folder. So I have a folder of back alley breaks. And then at some point I realized, wow, I have 50 of these pictures. It's an interesting topic. It's not that I somehow think I'm going to photograph breaks.
And you have a very interesting story to tell about the disarrangement of objects in a back alley.
There's a little blue book over there called Hong Kong Back Alley Reconstructed. And the idea was actually to take one of these assemblages from the workers and do an exhibition with the real objects. And I didn't want one which was too big. I wanted one with 50 or 60 objects. And I found a very beautiful one, but I couldn't find the owner. And I went there for 2 months or so, and I just he never was there. And so
Stole it.
So I stole it. But what I did, all the objects, there were coat hangers and scissors and all hung up in an interesting way. What I did is I went to a Japan home center and I bought every single object and replaced it with something new. And I wonder what this guy thought. He maybe thought, oh, what if I put something valuable up there? It's like Santa Claus. There's another interesting story. 2 years ago, I was photographing a pair of mops which were crossed over and were tied to a balustrade. in TSD East. And I was trying to figure out how to photograph it, had my camera to my face. And this young local couple came by, and the girl turned around and said, "You're taking a Michael Wolff photograph." And I said, "I am Michael Wolff."
Very good, Michael Wolff.
What I found interesting about that is the awareness of these things is really growing. 10, 15 years ago, no one would have had interest. When we did the book launch of Informal Solutions, it was every single newspaper and magazine in Hong Kong wrote about it. And there was it was just incredible. I never thought that would happen. So it's just people are recognizing that this is part of a Hong Kong way of life. And it's important, it makes Hong Kong unique. You don't see this anywhere else.
That surprised me too. I thought like back alley, who cares about back alley? And all the Hong Kong Chinese newspapers, almost every one of them came to you and then they did feature article talk about the back alley.
TV went through the back alleys with me and asked me to photograph their film. It was just amazing the interest in it.
And then, so he got the last laugh, so he came to me, smile on his face, and you see, I told him, I had him put it in your side.
Yeah.
Wow, this is nerving. Standing here, facing all of you. Well,
So, good.
okay, so what you're going to see is two old guys chewing the fat. It's going to be a very entertaining event.
I resent being called an old guy.
Okay. Not so old guy. Getting to be older guy. Okay. So in Cantonese, I'm learning to know ye gong ye. That's why. You don't want to know it. So, how may we entertain you? Where we want to start?
You can ask us questions.
Yeah, ask us question. But ask him, don't ask me. Yep.
The pictures that you showed earlier about the Sheikh May estate,
Right.
is that the resettlement estate that was knocked down? Which
It is, yeah. It was built after the landslide.
The fire,
The fire, yeah.
So second May fire in the 50s, and the photographs see, were unique in those blocks of flats. The first batch, actually, among the first batch of flat built after the second May fire. That was the very beginning of Hong Kong's housing program, the public housing program.
that's the same block as the Mayho house. The one that's standing, is it the same?
Did you photograph the whole house? That was the only block that's conserved.
Oh, yeah. That's now the Jockey Club thing.
There is a guest, a student,
Yeah.
water hostel. You didn't, it's the other one. Yeah, no, it's the one that were adjacent to your house, but along the same road.
The same kind of
Yeah,
estate.
exactly the same time,
It was
same design.
Block 36. Each one had a number.
You did block 36.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mayhaw House is block 41. So it's just right next door.
How do you know that?
Well, I'm architect. I mean, no architect. No architects know about such details.
Yeah, I thought there were only 36 blocks. Because this was the last one.
Okay, good question. I will go and check. Ain't no detail that I need to find out. See, now you planted the idea in my head. I need to know.
But what's interesting is somehow the drawing which Ho-yin did showed you this little sketch of the exact dimensions, 9.6 feet by 10.6. And the thickness of the walls and the height was 8.6, I think. It's It's an almost perfect cube. And the way I exhibit this is that I build a room exactly the same size. It's exactly the same size. It has the same window and the same entrance. And I put all 100 photographs inside this room. And it's a totally different way of seeing these things, because you suddenly enter a room which is tiny. It's really tiny, and you see how these how the people live. So it's sometimes in art the presentation is very important.
There's context. I mean, you're really reconstructing the context, so for people to understand the photograph. But that reminds me of one of my my favorite exhibition of yours, is the Toy Story. Talk about the Toy Story.
Talk about the Toy Story.
So you went to the all around Hong Kong. You got like literally thousands and thousands of pieces of toys.
That has nothing to do with Hong Kong, but
It's with China, the toy factory.
yeah.
But I'm all about the toys.
I went to America and rented a van, and I drove from San Francisco to Los Angeles. And I went to every secondhand store and every flea market, and I bought every single toy which was made in China, more or less smaller than my hand. And the goal was to collect 20,000 toys, and which means more or less 700 a day. And in the end, I managed it, and I packed it into a container and sent them back to Hong Kong. And I sanded down the back of each toy and attached one of these super magnets to it. And then I did an exhibition 45 square meters with a metal sheet, thin metal sheet on it, and I attached the toys with the magnets, 20,000 toys. But it's more than that. That would sort of be interesting and gimmicky, but I then went to China and photographed. I took portraits of toy factory workers who made these toys. And I think I put 13 portraits up, and they're surrounded by the toys. So it's interesting. You see the toys first, and then suddenly you see these portraits, and it becomes a totally different type of installation. But it's hell to put up.
20,000 pieces.
20,000 pieces.
But the interesting part of it is that when you told me the story about a woman coming to the exhibition and she started crying.
Yes, it was shown in 2004, the first time here in Hong Kong, and a lot of children came by. And sometimes even they had birthday parties there, because for children it was just fascinating. And I was there one afternoon, and this 10-year-old girl came, and she started crying, and she said, "Up there is my favorite toy," and it was lost in a fire, in a house fire. And she was just so sad, so of course I gave it to her.
No choice. This relates very much to conservation. So we are supposed to talk about conservation. So I'm struggling to try to find connections. So in conservation, we talk about collective memory, collective attachment, and that incident shows exactly the idea of collective attachment and collective memory, how you connect to something of the past in the present. Does it sound
like a psychologist.
Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to give myself some profile. But anyway, Charmaine, you're here, right? Charmaine? Charmaine, where are you? I just saw Charmaine. She disappeared. She walked out. Yeah, too boring for her. I'm good. If she's here, I would like her to comment. She's trained in conservation. And where is she? I thought I saw her a moment ago. Maybe she's under the seat or something.
She's hiding.
Yeah, she's hiding.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, of course.
Okay, because for the title today is conserve the more, and if you know Chinese, you know something very tricky there. And this title was created by Ho-yin. So Ho-yin has to tell us, to explain why you would take this title for this dialogue.
For those of us who are Chinese, right, I'm sure we have read Goldang. Goldang, yeah, right? And there's a lot of very blunt comment about certain things, and especially when it comes to conservation. So they would write things like "Bo Me El Yong." Okay. So that was originally the title, and Benny, the founder of French Club, when I proposed to him, he said, "Yes, this is the title we want." But after a while, I think it was you, right? You thought like, maybe that's a bit too blunt, maybe we should modify it, and so it became the two X's. And Benny, weren't you the one who will help GOD to come up with the slogan, the campaign slogan, "Delay No More"? Yeah. So that's why the title is English title is "Conserve No More." So it's for those of you who are not Cantonese speaker. So it's a one word. Okay? So if you read it aloud, it sounds like something really bad.
So Ho-yin, you advise the government on heritage issues, don't you?
Well, everybody wants to advise the government. So whether they want to listen is another thing.
Yeah, but you do.
Yeah.
And what's your experience?
Well, as in all government and anywhere in the world, so it's a big machine. So you have to find the right place just to oil it, and you find the right spot. The whole thing will start into motion. But that spot is very difficult to find. So very often, no matter how much you oil it, how much you throw things at it, you just froze it. Okay.
But how do you find the spot? What's your strategy?
I haven't. I'm still looking.
So it's very slow moving and difficult.
Yeah, and so you have to spend a lot of time, and it's not the work of one person. So it's a good thing that in our the architectural conservation program at the University of Hong Kong, shameless self-propaganda, we have a lot of graduates who work in the government, so they're helping to try to move things along.
Mm. And the Hong Kong has the biggest dried fish market in the world.
Mm-hmm.
What's it called? The Western dry goods market.
Those sell salted fish, shark fin, which is not politically correct these days.
But it's a huge area.
Yes.
And it's going to vanish.
Yeah.
But that's such a wonderful place and so typical of Hong Kong, and for me, it's one of the most interesting neighborhoods.
I know you're interested in those, and people have come to me, can we conserve those? I say, no, you can't. First thing, you try to tell people to conserve shark fin, the shark fin trade, you will get murdered. And the second thing is that these are not these are intangible heritage. So it's a trade, and if it's an intangible heritage, it's a living heritage, that means it will die. So sometimes you just have to let go. When the time comes that it's no longer viable, acceptable to society. But what
But that's cynical.
I know you're getting very cynical, but that's what happened to you when you get older, right? But then what you're really looking for is not the trade itself, but the atmosphere of the kind of old trade, of connection to people. I mean, always go back to connection with people. That is what conservation is about. I mean, never mind about the old building. People will say you want to protect this Tong Lao, that building because it's beautiful, the detail. I mean, that's all subjective. Right? So what they're really harping on is the old ways of we live, and how we engage ourselves in society, and by connecting to people, which a lot of people find missing in today's world. I mean, obviously, like I'm being included on duty, and we stay at our phone, saying they talk to me and say, what, wait, let me finish this WhatsApp. In fact, I'm WhatsApping you. So, it's that kind of connection with people that we're trying to retain.
Yeah, this intangible heritage is so important.
Yeah.
One of the most boring Asian cities for me, actually the most boring, is Singapore.
where I grew up.
Where you grew up.
You don't say that in Singapore, you get locked up. You don't get locked up, you get kicked out. Not welcome anymore.
But if you talk about the intangible heritage in Hong Kong, can you share more about how do you think it is developing well, or we still have a way to go to that kind of intangible?
Well, surprisingly, Hong Kong is doing very well, and to a large extent, it's driven by the people. I mean, conservation should always be about the people and from the people, and not from some experts, right? A small group of experts. So, and the Hong Kong people, the younger people, we talk about localism. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about Hong Kong's independence and all this. Let's not go there. So local identity, especially cultural identity, and that's what's been driving this understanding of Hong Kong's intangible cultural heritage. And in fact, you are one of them who's driving it. All your photograph is trying to capture that essence about intangible cultural heritage of Hong Kong, about local identity especially.
But I disagree with you that it's somehow working out, because look at Shamshui. Every time I go there, another building is torn down. And it's such a beautiful, typical area for Hong Kong. Beautiful dai pai dongs, there are different trades, small trades. You can buy interesting cloth, buttons.
I know, yeah.
And it's going to be gone. All that's going to be gone. So it's an example that it's not working.
I don't have a solution with it. So, and sometimes people talk to me as if I work for the government. So sometimes I know a lot of people see me as a running dog of the government. So yeah, to some extent I am, but I don't have the solution. So what do you think? Or what do you think?
No, I don't think there is a solution. It's just I'm observing it and I'm seeing how it's going, and I'm seeing it makes me sad every time I go. Another piece of Hong Kong heritage is gone, because in 10, 15 years, the whole city is going to look different.
The way I see it is that it's a personal thought that it's going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, one day, and we're going to be so overdeveloped and to such a ridiculous extent that everything will just collapse, and then you start again, then things will get better.
That's a good idea.
I know you like that idea. Break it all down, repeat it again.
Yeah, that's the problem, though. You can't reverse it.
No, you can't. So, but the good thing is that, for example, your book on Hong Kong corner houses, and none of the building, not a single one of them featured in your book is considered a heritage building. But yet, these are the buildings, and you have correctly identified that these are the buildings that represents Hong Kong's future heritage stock. So forget about Hong Kong's pre-Second World War buildings. There's so few of them, and located in isolation, in isolated places. I mean, conserving them is not going to do anything. Okay? And you want to make an impact, you have to conserve buildings en masse. So in the entire area, a small district at least, so you can see them, in context. So, and those buildings feature in Michael Wolf's corner houses book. It's about Hong Kong's 50s, 60s architecture. And we start to think about not freezing, controlling the development of districts in our urban area with this building. And in 20, 30 years' time, we have a very nice heritage district.
But is that going to happen?
No. Well, but if you make enough noise, then it might happen. So, I mean, again, as I say, conservation all comes down to people. You go to, you look at the history of conservation anywhere in the world, in the city, it's never driven by the elite, never driven by the rich people or the government. It's always driven by the people. It's because people demand for it, and so the government responds.
Can I ask a question? Sure. Both of you. Just to throw in, a spanner in the works. I grew up, in one of those buildings that Michael described, and I lived there for a good part of my childhood in a very poor neighborhood, no window in a room. So when Michael Ho-yin, you talk about conserving old buildings like that, I think it's usually from an outsider's point of view. For those people who live there, the question of, do you want to conserve and you don't have to live there, so it's easy for you to say hold on to those old buildings. But for those people who have been living there for most of their life, maybe they want a bit of better hygiene, a flush toilet, a room with a window, things like that. So maybe you care to discuss a little bit more about an outsider looking inside, and romanticize the picture. But for people who actually live there, they may want some progress and change. So the question is, how can we balance that? So don't go overboard with the romanticism of conservation.
No, I agree with you, and I had this. I've talked about this several times, especially after the fire in Ho-yin Street a few years ago, where 3 or 4 people died, and I realized that these buildings are fire traps. They have cardboard walls. They have small rooms. So you're right. It's a form of romanticizing. But I think architecturally, maybe it's possible to do something. I mean, Singapore, for instance, has always kept the facades, and behind the facades, you have a shopping mall or whatever. But it depends. I think one has to look at it architecturally as well and see what one can do from the inside.
This is what is being promoted in our program, in the conservation program, and is that we are not, modern conservation is not about conserving for conservation's sake. And that idea of, the romantic idea of protecting something as a piece of antique for exhibition, just to look at, that is an obsolete idea. That originated from the field of archaeology, finding things in the ground, they put in a museum, and museum, basically museumology. So, but in today's context, especially in the Hong Kong context, the kind of conservation that at least we are promoting at the University of Hong Kong is about the reuse of building. How do you repurpose a building, and so that you make it relevant and useful again in today's world. And and in many ways, we are taking a rather unsentimental approach in conservation. So by focusing on the use. So, and you exaggerate many, I mean, for me at least, I'm totally against, on people wanting to conserve building exactly the way it is so that they can come and take a look, okay, that's not right, it's unethical. So, and so conservation is really about how to improve life, but retaining certain identity, retaining history. Okay? And a good example to illustrate this is the Blue House, which is going to be open soon, the Blue House cluster in Wan Chai. And this is once I told a bunch of people from UNESCO saying that this Blue House revitalization project is probably the world's first conservation project driven and led by a group of social workers. It is, and they've done the right thing. What they are doing is not about the building, they're focusing on the people, and they are trying to use conservation as a means, to improve the livelihood of the people and to protect the identity of the community. And I thought, wow, that's exactly right. So,
Dr. Lee, sorry.
Ho-yin, just Ho-yin, please.
So, because you just going to the topic of Blue House, of course it just started, but as we go down the road, how do you evaluate whether the whole rehabilitation or conservative approach is meaningful or is successful?
Well, the Blue House cluster, consisting of the Blue House, the Yellow House, and the Orange House, is being completed. And the opening is in mid-September, I believe. They have a grand opening. To take a look and see what they're really doing. So, and your question is how, well, this is the the Blue House Cluster Project is the first project of its kind with the slogan "Lao Uk Lao Yan," and so I advise them, I help them, the social workers at the Blue House, on the part of the project. And they asked me to translate Lao Uk Lao Yan. So I translated it as conservation first, community always. So because this is exactly what they're trying to aim at, to protect the community, to sustain the community. And and what they have done is really to upgrade the entire building. The building just as to serve a greater purpose, and not to look at every single detail as if it's an archaeological site, and make them protect everything. Don't touch it, don't change it. So they see what has to be changed in order to make it more livable, and that is the idea. And the building is 100% compliance to all the building safety code. Okay? This is the most difficult part. How do you make it safe for the residents by meeting the code? Okay? How do you measure safety, right? So it's based on building codes, like fire escape, and structural strength and all that, and so on. And this project, the difficulty is to make it compliant and without, altering the building into such an extent that you lose its character, its historical character. So we'll see, it's applied for a UNESCO Conservation Award, and the result should be out maybe early next month, so September. So if it wins an award, so that would be a good indication that they have done the right thing.
I have another question for you. Ho-yin, I think you've done great work for Hong Kong, because the concept of conservation came rather late to Hong Kong. Now, throw our minds back to 1976, the General Post Office. Now, I'm talking about something away from Sam Sui Po, right in Central. There was the General Post Office building at Wordian. It's something that when we look at the photo now, we feel there's something that hurt, because that building practically disappeared overnight to make way for progress, because MTR actually demolished the General Post Office in order to make way for I don't know what, but in those days we have no say. So that building just disappeared overnight. Now, if we have the chance, now we know it's important to conserve buildings like that. What would you have done now?
For this, and as we advocate in our program again, you have to take a bigger approach to conservation if you want to make an impact. So you mentioned Singapore and Shanghai, and conservation is carried out under the framework of urban planning. So in other words, conservation, in order to make it effective, you have to be a part of the whole planning system. But right now it's not. In Hong Kong, that is still detached from planning. So in Hong Kong, the planning of the city in terms of how the land is being used, right, for what purpose, so that's all done. And if the planning crash into a heritage building within the master plan, and then decision will be made, afterwards, to see whether that building can be saved or not. Usually, after you've done all the planning work, you can't be saved. Case in point is the Star Ferry Pier, the Queen's Pier. So because of all the infrastructure planning, the reclamation, the roads, everything's been planned. You can't move, it can't be moved. So the Star Ferry Pier and the Queen's Pier were demolished. But again, that shows the demolition of the two piers. That shows how important it is for the community to make its voice heard. And then because of the protest, because of the noise made by the voice made by the community in the protest for against the demolition of the Star Ferry Pier, and Hong Kong finally got its first ever conservation policy. And with that policy, the 2007 conservation policy is a direct result of the protest. against the demolition of the two piers. So make your voice heard if you want to make a difference in Hong Kong's protecting Hong Kong's heritage. So back to the way to do conservation, and we look at what has been done successfully throughout the world in cities. Has done carry out conservation successfully, and we can see and we find that conservation is part of the entire planning system. So that means if you do infrastructural planning, new town and whatnot, and in those cities, heritage or rather heritage buildings are always taken into consideration as part of the planning. So if you have an area that need to be replanned into housing and whatnot, and there so happens there's a heritage village right there, and a traditional village right there in this site for the master plan, and then you have to figure out how to integrate this village, you have to conserve it with the rest of the master plan design, and not try to do it retrospectively, decide whether it can be retained or not, with the design that's already been done and without consideration to that village. Okay. So I mean, Singapore has done it and showed that it's very successful, and Shanghai too. And I'm not familiar with Germany. What about in Germany?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Conservation is a very important part of
planning.
planning.
So about France.
Also.
Yeah, France, they conserve everything. And it works, you see, so.
Look at Paris.
Yeah, look at Paris, don't let developer fool you. And they always have this scare tactic telling you that we need to develop and conservation is standing in the way of progress, and ruin Hong Kong's economy. It's not. Look at France, they control development to a huge extent, and it's a whole city in Hong Kong, and we build and build and we develop and redevelop, and we're not a whole city. So they say something.
Can I say something? Because France surrendered very quickly, so Paris was spared. We're talking about Germany. Most of Germany was bombed out. So what we see now in Germany, they actually rebuilt. What you think, are old buildings, they actually rebuilt. So it's quite a different situation,
But let me get back to this romanticizing. There are many buildings or even neighborhoods which are really not fit to live in, which can be torn down. But what I don't understand is why, for instance, in Shepkip May, there's a beautiful, long, double row of houses, the typical houses with the rooftops and the little shops underneath, and one half is already gone. Why can't the government hire good architects and rebuild it? It doesn't have to look the same, but just in that style, and keep the neighborhood somehow intact. And behind it, there's a beautiful lane with trees. But no, because the property developers have so much power, and they tell them, and what ends up being there is an ugly 50-story high-rise.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't get.
And a lot of people will start to argue that, look, if you don't redevelop the place you're talking about, we tend to lose so much money, blah blah blah.
Yeah, of course,
but the thing is that so the class, and earlier this year we went to Singapore with our conservation class, the master degree class, and we spoke with some of the most senior people in the Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority, which is a government authority. Okay, and there's also a planning authority, a conservation authority, a land authority, and also an urban renewal authority. And we asked them about, or rather our Hong Kong class people asked the official about conservation in Singapore. And they say, like Singapore seems to be very successful because you have managed to conserve so many buildings and in a typical Hong Kong way. But then, at what price? So you conserve so many buildings, and then you stand to lose, so much money, if you have to, if you are not conserving it and then rebuild it. And then this Singapore government guy started to laugh and said, no, that's not true. Say, make a guess of the percentage of the heritage building being conserved, or rather the land on which this building stand, the percentage in proportion to all the all the land that is in Singapore that can be developed for whatever use. And So of course it's a trick question, right? So we say, okay, give out, what's the answer? The answer is 0.03%. And we asked the official, I said, did we hear it wrong? You mean 3%? I said, no, it's 0.03%, not even 0.5%. Okay, and so it has no impact on the Singapore's economic development. In fact, it has other benefits like tourism and whatnot. And so in Hong Kong, so how many heritage buildings do we have? According to the list, government list, we have 1,444 and plus some of the later addition. So let's say 1,005 graded historic building, and if each and every one of these 1,500 buildings is conserved, and don't let people tell you that we stand to lose a lot of money. Those, because the amount of land they stand on compared with Hong Kong's the land area in Hong Kong that can be developed is minuscule. I would dare to stick my neck out and say that it's not even 0.5%. See, so it's all scare tactic. If you keep on harping on the fact that we're going to lose money, then forget it. Okay, why have conservation? Let's all make money. Why have West Kowloon Cultural District? Forget it. Let's make money. Okay, forget about art. Forget about heritage. So forget about Michael Wu. Who cares about you? You don't make money.
But it's not that they're going to lose money. It's that they can make more money.
Exactly, but it's presented as if they have lost money. It's money that shouldn't be made in the first place. So in conservation, the best argument is to understand economics and argue with developer and whoever in economic term. They will lose. They will lose because in Hong Kong. And once I make an argument, I say, look, in Hong Kong, there's never been any evidence, never, not in the past, not in the present, and not in the future, that conservation is undermining development, especially economic development. Never. Okay, it's not going to happen. So, and once people argue about why conserve, let's have public housing, and again I say that show me any evidence that conservation is in the way of public housing, that we are because of conservation is denying people of much needed housing. Never, there's no such evidence. It's never going to happen because the places that is going to be conserved are not places that should be used for public housing. In fact, the places that the heritage building that we have lost, we have always lost it for commercial development. So, and the big question is, again, conservation. You should always ask the question, like, who stand to benefit? I mean, I'm all for development, but the question is, okay, let's say we give up this heritage building for something else, for development, make tons of money, good, all for money, I like money. And, but the question is, are you getting something better in return? And who benefit from this new development? And these are questions that cannot be satisfactorily answered and cannot be, and usually the answer is not accept. Is you find it very difficult to accept by society. Who's benefit? And are we getting something better?
Developers.
Of course,
There's a case in point. Remember Oil Street?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oil Street, the buildings are nothing to write home about. And it was the government's warehouse. But before it was sold to Chung Kong for development, they rent out the space, and then artists, many arts groups responded to it because it was so cheap. And then in a very short time, the whole Oil Street compound was occupied. And then arts was there to revitalize the space. I mean, revitalize in a, you can't imagine how vibrant that was in a very short period of time. But instead of letting that develop into an art space, an art quarter, the government sold it to Chung Kong. And now, if you go down to Oil Street, then you can see, it's just a block of land, to be sold to people who could, afford to afford it. But what happened to all those art arts group who were there. But instead of letting it grow organically, they then spend a lot of money trying to build West Kowloon. And now, we don't know, whether West Kowloon will have the same impact and effect as Oil Street. And I can say that, you can't have that kind of impact because Oil Street was an initiative, by the artists themselves. And whereas, if you try and impose on the usage of land, such as West Kowloon, the effect will not be as great as something which is grown organically.
Yeah. Well, the same thing, what you're describing is it's very similar to how the development of the Fringe Club back in the 80s when you started it, and it was the initiative of enthusiasts and art people, and look what we have today, and so the Fringe Club is becoming something that's practically indispensable. I mean, nobody would ever imagine tearing this building down, which has become the headquarters of the Hong Kong Fringe Club. But at one point, as you told me before, there was a potential crisis of some developer would come in and buy up this very valuable corner site in the middle of Central for some commercial development. Was that right?
Yes. When we first moved in with no concept of conservation, we just wanted a space for arts, as simple as that. And because this is a landmark building, people know where it is, and then because of the high ceiling, which is good for art use. But what saved us was actually not because of any other reason, but because this was built on a rather awkward piece of land. So government actually tried and redevelop it. They were talking about tearing the building down to make way for a wider road. That's one option. The other option is to turn it into some kind of recreation area. And then, of course, the developers, they look at the piece of land and thought, well, what can we do with it? Because it's narrow and it's rather hard to use. That's why it was saved, but not forever, because we're only leasing it, on a five-year lease. Every moment we are threatened by a developer wanting to turn it into, they say, better use of the building.
Yeah. So back to Michael. So your photographs seems to make quite an impact in Hong Kong, in terms of what? What's your biggest contribution in Hong Kong? So why do we need you? Why do we love? Why do we care about you?
I think one of my favorite topics is vernacular culture, and it's a part of intangible heritage. But as I said, I think 10, 15 years ago, no one would have been aware of mops and gloves and bastard chairs.
Yeah, back alley.
Back alleys, yeah. So I created an awareness for that. And I think it has something to do with identity. Every city has its own identity. And people are suddenly realizing that this is part of their identity, which is really important, that you are proud of it and enjoy, respect it.
That is true, because I thought of something when I was watching the movie Ghost in the Shell, still playing, right? And the whole setting of this story, the set in the future is all in Hong Kong. And I look at it, I see somehow I keep seeing Michael Wolff images everywhere, damn, this Michael Wolff guy, it's like, you're really screwing our mind, You're brainwashing us.
I thought exactly the same thing. I thought a researcher must have bought the book, and just referenced it.
Yeah, that could be true.
It's the same with the Transformer movie.
Yeah.
in that Quarry Bay building,
Mhm.
they used a part of that as well.
That's right, especially your architectural density. There's a very, very influential. So there you go. Yeah. So, aren't you glad we have Michael Wolff? Yeah. You save Hong Kong.
And I love you.
So to do conservation, don't look at architects, conservationists, and look at economists, and look at people like Michael Wolff and artists. They are the one who's going to help conserve Hong Kong. Right? Artists, like Betty, Michael Wolff, right?
Ho-yin, can you talk a little bit more about the buildings that have been rebuilt, and then they look like they are original, but in fact they are not. But when we go there as tourists, and when we still see those, do you think that's ethical?
Oh, well, at one point, talking about 30, 40, 50 years ago, that seems to be a good idea. And I felt how it came about is after the Second World War, places like Warsaw, in some of the German cities, like Cologne, the famous Cologne Cathedral, one of the best examples of Baroque architecture in Cologne Cathedral. Dresden.
Classic.
No, it's Cologne. Cologne Cathedral, was bombed out. I mean Dresden too, and then it was painstakingly rebuilt because of the importance, the cultural significance, the historical significance to the city. So like Warsaw was painstakingly rebuilt, and they became a World Heritage Site. And because of this is such a good example of collective memory. The Warsaw city case, right? A bunch of architecture professors before the Germans invaded, they saved all the cities, all the drawing, the plans, all the buildings, and they hide it in the cellar or something. And of course, the Germans destroyed the city. I mean, the Nazi, destroyed the city. And after the war, all these the professor retrieved the plan, and then they reconstructed every single building. So it shows the spirit of the people, So and for them, that became very important as a symbol. And because of example like this, extreme example like this, that inspired people to think, that the reconstructing building that's gone, or they have to demolish it and rebuild it somewhere, kind of look the same, would be all right, but it's not all right because these reconstruction projects, they don't carry the same kind of significance as places like Warsaw and Cologne and Dresden. And so what example do we have in Hong Kong? Murray House. Yeah, Murray House.
If you comment on that.
Yeah, Murray House.
Wedding Card Street.
You should all go, Wedding Card Street. These are almost like comedy. I would see them as architectural comedies. And you go to Murray House in Stanley. So what you see is not a conservation project. I mean, the story's always been like the Murray House is moved from Central to Stanley. No, not true. Totally not true. And what happened was that the facing stones, the granite slabs and the stone columns of Murray House has been saved and kept somewhere. Actually, well, that's another story. I'm not going to go into that. I know about that storage place because I was there. And then when the time came, finally the government had to do something. The stone has been left for 20, 30 years. So, and they found this public housing estate. They needed a shopping mall, so they built a shopping mall, a brand new shopping mall of reinforced concrete, but roughly the size of the original Murray House, so that they can replant all the stone back to this new building. So that is not a conservation project, but it's an outstanding recycling project. Yeah, somebody will give them an award. Yeah, recycling, very friendly to the environment. And another story that's fake, is that the stone from the original building has been carefully numbered so that when it's placed back, onto for reconstruction, they know exactly the location. No, not true. The numbering, they did some numbering, but then I think they gave up, because it's too complicated. So according to the architect who handled this project in the Murray House, they say that they just kind of guess, what this stone would go where, So it's all over the place, and in the end, they left with pieces of stone they didn't know where to fit in, So, and for places that they couldn't find the right piece, and they have to make new ones, So again, it's fake, So don't believe it. Okay? And the standing house, I got more to brag about. And you'll find that besides the old stones and the old columns on this new shopping mall, there are also freestanding columns taken from shop houses that have been demolished, I believe from Hong Kong, right? And then you also have a pier, and that has been also demolished, and then reconstructed, the Blake's Pier. So I'm sure more is to come, So it becomes like a collection place for all these abandoned, heritage, Yeah, lost heritage, This is a project. Michael has this one of my favorite projects, another favorite, the Hong Kong Lost Laundry. So he goes around the city capturing images of a laundry that's been blown away and gets stuck somewhere forever, So your bra, panties, underwear, get stuck, So fantastic.
What do you think of Wedding Car Street?
Okay, another community is your favorite, right? Lidong Street. So Lidong Street is gone. So now what you see is, people ask me whether those are heritage buildings. I say, of course not. Those, I don't know where the developer had the idea from. These are buildings that's never happened in Hong Kong. It's vaguely resemble buildings somewhere in London, maybe, or I don't know, in Germany or on drugs. So those are cartoon buildings.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ho-yin, and thank you, Michael, for today. I would like to take this chance to talk about our upcoming projects. And in fact, this dialogue is under a very big project called Jockey Cup Cultural Heritage Leadership Project. It is a 25-month project, and we have it in the middle. And we're having some other big productions as well, like 2 exhibitions and site-specific productions, and also a series of talk as well. And next talk will be on the 7th of October. And our guest is from Singapore. You'll love it. Come, next time. You'll love it. And
No, keep Michael away.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So stay,
Yeah,
keep him out of trouble.
It's Kevin Tang, and I would like Benny to introduce or to talk a little bit about that.
Have we allowed for Q&A?
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah.
okay. If you have more questions, then come afterwards. Now, the talk that Catherine has described, you should have a copy of this. I will be talking with Kevin Tang. Now, he's from Singapore, and why you should come and listen to him is because he's a Renaissance man, and he managed to get the Singapore government to do something which we think nobody is able to do. Now, at that time, the Singapore government wanted to repossess some cemetery in order, for Singapore to build highways and also use the land to develop the cemetery, for more buildings, for people to live in and commercial complex and so on. Now, what Kevin was able to do was to delay the project using very legitimate and legal reason, i.e. he was able to convince the Singapore government to allow for the conservationists to come in and register each tomb. And then that area accommodates something like 100,000 tombs. So that actually took them a long time, but it's the kind of project that Kevin is able to talk about. Now, I know that we are all concerned about now if we do not agree with government policies, what should we do apart from going into the street and demonstrate or to do something more drastic. like trying to break down the door of the electrical building. Now that on a legal point of view, you're liable to go to jail for that. Kevin is going to talk about that. How to create a legitimate platform to show dissent, on government policy. So please come in and join our dialogue. 7th of October. Kevin is not just going to talk about cemeteries, so don't worry, because he's a Renaissance man. He's also going to talk about.
He's a lawyer.
He's a lawyer. He's also a music critic. He's also going to share with us the newest Singapore lifestyle. Okay, so do come.
So everyone, all the books which Ho-yin and I have done together are here on the table. You can browse through them.
Yes, and Ho-yin and Michael will stay for a little while, so if you still have some questions, you can come down, feel free to ask them. And also, if you're excited about the dialogue, and because seats are limited, if you want to register, we have a table outside, you can register, or you can go to this QR code and register online. So welcome everyone, and then thanks for coming. Thank you.
If you have got your own copy of Michael Rule's book, now is a good time to get his signature. It's both money, I'm selling mine.